And what the data says in the developmental research is that all of our attachment adaptations are designed to keep us with as much closeness as possible, given the caregiver's capacity. A child who develops an avoidant pattern, what they're avoiding is sharing their emotions, expressing what they feel, letting somebody else know, I'm not okay. That's what they're avoiding. And they're avoiding it because they've learned very early on that their caregivers are not able to help them feel better.
Welcome to the Empowered Parenting Summit series. This is our kickoff session, and I am delighted to go deeper into the concept of attachment styles and why it matters for those of us who are committed to using parenting as a vehicle for our own personal growth and transformation. That's really what we're all about here at the Giant Institute for Parenting. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Eli, because creating secure attachment is one of the 5 foundational pillars
Mhm.
that we talk about here at the Giant Institute. It's something that we really believe in. I remember, I don't know, 5 years ago when Dan Siegel said secure attachment is the new like North Star of
Mm.
parenting,
Mhm.
versus, getting our kids to behave. And so you are our favorite expert in this area, and you're our executive director. And so I'm just really delighted to be able to share your wisdom with our people, our community, in this session today. And, I know some of these terms get kind of bandied about Instagram and TikTok.
Yes.
And the intention of this series is to really go deeper so that we're not having to limit ourselves to the soundbite culture that we're in and
Mhm.
really talk about what it is. And so I would love for you to first define define attachment
Mhm.
science. What is it
Mhm.
and why does it matter?
Okay. So one of the reasons that I want everyone to kind of go, oh, why has some of this been confusing for me? I want to validate that we actually have a lot of research, and that research isn't all from the same tradition. So there is research from the developmental sciences, which is where we draw most of our kind of information. And then there's also research from the social sciences, and it's all valid research. But I would say from a parenting perspective, the research we want to be the most in tune with is the developmental research. And the developmental research defines attachment as the relationship between two people, and in particular, in childhood, a caregiver and a child. And that can change and transform, obviously, and it does over time between, peers and friends and sweethearts. So we have attachments with many different people throughout our life. But it's really the relationships that we form early on that help us develop our sense of selves, our sense of belonging, help us regulate, help us learn survival skills. So, attachment is, and this is where it gets complicated, it's a biological instinct. It's the instinct we all have to seek proximity to our caregivers and as caregivers to keep our kids close to us. It is a theory of regulation and brain development. So it's how our species develops our brain capacity is through this experience of being in relationship with each other. We like to say there's a two brain system as a human species, right? There's no baby that's born and looks up at their caregivers and goes, "Yeah, I don't know, I could do better. I'm I'm looking elsewhere. Anybody else interested in this small wee babe?"
It's like
No,
the baby duck. You're my person.
yes, imprinting, exactly. There is a dependence in
Hmm.
our species. We are born entirely dependent, which means we are born entirely relational. Now, the quality of those dynamics varies from we call it a dyad. That's a fancy word that just means two people relating to each other. So, in each dyad, there's going to be different dynamics. So you have babies that are born into the arms of caregivers who are very warm and intentional and grounded and resourced, have lots of resources. And then you have babies that are born into the arms of caregivers who maybe struggle with ideas about caregiving. They've got like generational trauma that they've inherited. And so they believe it's their job to teach the child not to need anything, right? Very different experiences developmentally and internally for a child. So when we're talking about attachment, we're talking about the story of our relationships. How have we experienced relationships, and how have those experiences cultivated patterns in us? I know the internet loves to use the word styles, and styles is from the social psychology research. It's a different way of thinking about it. It's a little bit more like, which Harry Potter character are you?
Which box do I fit in?
Which can be really helpful. That can
Yeah.
be really helpful to be able to be like, oh, this is why I'm doing this. This is my style. This is my partner's style, whatever. But I like the word pattern because most of us actually tend to have multiple patterns, and we tend to adapt our patterns depending on the relationship we're in. This style idea I'm going to shy away from, because when we are in different relationships, we do tend to adapt differently, right?
Hmm.
So I had a different attachment pattern with my mother than I did with my father. And while I was probably more closely bonded to my mother, and so that experience had a deeper impact on my neurobiology and on my ways of relating, I still learned something over here, right? And depending on the type of relationships I've been in later on in life, those adaptations get activated in different ways. And all of our kids are so different if you have more than one kid. So then that's going to activate differently in your relationships with your kids. So I want us to be thinking about patterns when we think about attachment.
That is so very clarifying for me. So much of this work lives in the gray. And I
Yes.
think we're all conditioned for like black and white thinking. And if I know this about myself, I can do
Yes.
these specific things. But as you're saying that, I think of so many relationships in my own life where when another person's attachment patterns come up, I course correct
Yes.
internally
Yes.
to remain safe in that relationship. Whereas other people who have, maybe able to meet different needs, those patterns can be more
Yes.
relaxed and authentic. And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That being said, let's talk about insecure attachment in adults.
Mhm.
What does that look like? How can we start to use that knowing, that kind of insight
Mhm.
that we have into our own patterns and how
Mhm.
we respond to certain personality characteristics in
Mhm.
others as a gateway to bolster our own secure attachment within ourselves? Because correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's kind of the first step of secure
Yes.
attachment. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say the first step is having an understanding of our story
Mhm.
and of the ways we coped with that story. So our experiences and our patterns. So if we're looking back at our childhood, we want to go, when I was tender, when I was sad or scared or overwhelmed, was there a grown-up in my life who was available to me, was receptive to what I was feeling, was warm and grounded and could stay separate, right? Both receptive and separate,
Mhm.
and effective at soothing me. Like, would I feel better after I flumped into their arms and they held me, or they held my gaze and offered me empathy? Was this person effective, or was there a person who was effective at helping me feel connected when I was tender? And if your answer to that is no, then what we want to do is get curious about, well, let me say that differently. Was there someone who could do all those things consistently? And then I will say, if your answer is no, then we get curious about, what did your caregivers do? And how did you adapt in order to maintain closeness? So one of the things I like to dispel this myth, because in the internet, like avoidant attachment gets like the harshest. It's like avoidant, watch out for avoidant people, the avoidance. And the mythology there is this idea that if someone is avoidant, that they're avoidant of attachment. And what the data says in the developmental research is that all of our attachment adaptations are designed to keep us with as much closeness as possible, given the caregiver's capacity, right? So a child who develops an avoidant pattern, what they're avoiding is sharing their emotions, expressing what they feel, letting somebody else know I'm not okay. That's what they're avoiding. And they're avoiding it because they've learned very early on that their caregivers are not able to help them feel better. And that might be because the caregiver is avoidant themselves, it gets awkward and weird,
Yeah.
leaves the room when emotions come in. Or it might be because the caregiver is overly anxious. So if the child brings tender feelings, the caregiver has a panic attack. Oh my gosh, what does this mean? What do we do? How, do we go to the hospital? What do I need?
I'll do
Like,
anything to make it stop.
yes, right?
Yeah.
But so, the child learns if I want to stay close and as regulated as possible to my caregiver, my best strategy is to swallow what I feel. Okay? And a lot of parents out there have had that experience.
Mhm.
And so what's hard is you come into parenthood and your children have so many feelings. I like to joke that we're just born as a little ball of feelings. There's no cognition at the beginning, right? It's like,
Right. I
and
mean,
so
that
it's,
makes perfect sense. It's uh, hormones and chemicals moving through their body, and there's no capacity to interpret or manage or regulate those feelings. Like, of course, that's how we start out in the world.
yes, yes. But if you've adapted in your own childhood by leaving the room metaphorically or literally whenever your emotions come up or someone else's emotions come up, and then you are now entrusted with this ball of emotions, you're in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah.
You either have to pass on that insecure pattern and teach your child not to look for you in those moments, or you have to heal that instinct to flee and learn how to stay present and learn how to be the thing you never had.
Mm.
Right?
It was such a game changer for me in my own personal growth journey when I really got the concept that my defense mechanisms and maladaptive communication patterns and the ways that I sabotaged myself in relationships were innocent,
Mm,
right? Like they came from sweet little Kiva who was doing her best to figure out how the world worked. And
yes.
she developed some very smart coping strategies
In the
in
context
order,
of your childhood, right?
correct.
It's like this applies here. I always think of, I've worked a lot with folks that are in military settings and like what you have to learn and do and adapt for in a war zone
Mm,
is brilliant. You have to do that. You're doing everything you can to survive that situation. But then when you come back from the war zone and you have to go to Home Depot, those skills you learned in battle actually work against you at Home Depot,
mm,
right? Someone comes around the corner at Home Depot, now you've got an assault charge, right?
yeah.
And so I think some of what we're all working through is how I adapted in this early environment isn't necessarily what I need now. And
It's,
and the only way we get there is by reflecting on all of that, right? We really have to go,
yeah.
what did I need and how did that happen? I've talked a little bit about avoidance. I also want to talk about hypervigilance. So when a child is growing up in an environment where a caregiver is able to do what we talked about, be warm, sturdy, reliable, consistent, and caring and soothing, but they're only able to do it intermittently. So there's no way for a child to predict when that will happen and when they will get the other thing. And the other thing might be avoidance, dismissiveness, anxiety, who knows? Then a child is in a bit of a predicament because they know this thing can happen and they want it because it's biologically wired to seek that experience of a relational co-regulation. But they don't know how to predict when it will happen. And so the skill that gets developed, this is opposite of the avoidance skill. The avoidance skill is like just don't even try. Just let it go. It's never happening, right? Is hypervigilance. Scan for it, look for it, keep your eyes on the ball. Always, 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 always. Do you love me now? Do you love me now? Are you still there? Are you there? And what becomes problematic for a child in that situation is they're feeling responsible
Mm,
for the caregiver's reactions. So they come to believe, I will be good. I will be aware. I will do certain things, and that might make my caregiver give me that juicy, lovely moment that I'm craving so much. And of course, it's untrue. that the child is determining whether that moment happens or not, but they have to believe that because otherwise you kind of lose your mind
Yeah.
in that confusion, right? So then you come into parenthood. And if you've never resolved that, then you relate to your children through hypervigilance, which is not the same as attunement. Attunement is the ability to accurately read the inner emotional state of somebody else, specifically your child, and to offer them co-regulation. You okay, Ken? Did you having a rough day? I'm fine. Oh, okay. Okay. It seems like you're not wanting to talk feelings right now. No. Okay. I got you. Like that's an attuned regulated. I'm noticing, I'm recognizing my child is in an agitated state. I'm also accepting that they are not ready to talk about it. If I'm in a hypervigilant state, it's more like this. What's wrong? What's wrong? They're like, nothing. Oh, I can tell something's wrong. I can tell it. I know you're not okay. All right, fine, leave me alone. Oh, I mean, what? Right. So and now we're co-dysregulating because I'm not steady and sturdy in myself and confident in my own ability to wait for that moment, to, trust that it can be resolved. And so I'm in a fear state. And now my child eventually will probably develop, they probably already have developed avoidance, right? That's probably
Yeah.
why they're telling me no, nothing's wrong. Because they're like, this won't make me feel better. If I give you the information of what's wrong, I don't actually think you're going to be able to help me feel better.
Yeah.
In fact, I might feel worse because you might make me feel more anxious about the thing.
Yeah. Oh, have I been there?
Yes.
Totally get it. Totally get that one. So what I'm hearing you say is it's important that as the adult in the relationship, that we become aware of these patterns so that we're not seeking our child to meet our attachment needs. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, we're not asking our child to make us feel okay. We're helping our children feel okay. And we can only do that if we've had the experience of feeling okay, which that's the work. That's why I've written my books, right? Like there's work to put in to seek out a therapist or a group of people or be a part of the Jai Institute. Like find places where you can learn and heal with other people so that your child is just simply getting their needs met from you, as opposed to helping you feel like you are a good parent or everything's fine.
Where I think this can be confusing in the internet lands, in the lands of the internet, is we can jump to an assumption
Mm.
that in order to create secure attachment, um, we need to always be, what was the word that
Oh,
you used?
hypervigilant.
Mm,
Oh, attuned.
attuned. Thank you. That
Right.
one. In order, like, if we don't do that,
Hmm.
then our child is going to have these future consequences that we want to avoid. And so, therefore, we avoid conflict, we avoid
Hmm.
having expectations, we avoid hard emotions with our children and kind of pave the way for them. Can you talk about how attachment, healthy attachment, can be fostered through the inevitable, right? Like we're parents. There are going to be times that our
Hmm.
children are not happy
Hmm.
with our decisions, with our requests, with our expectations.
Yeah, I'm going to use a metaphor for this.
Great.
So I want you to think of like the calendar year, okay? And you have ordinary time, and you have holiday time, and you also have tax season. Okay. So in our relationship to our children, the majority of our experiences are actually going to be ordinary time. They're not going to be deeply connected and in sync. They're going to be like, okay, those library books, where did we put them? Where are they? Right? Or, yep, okay, one second, I got to finish putting this in the oven so that we have time for whatever. We're doing life, we're functioning. Okay. Then there's going to be those holiday moments. And by those holiday moments, I don't necessarily mean just the happy fun stuff. I actually mean like the sacred stuff. Because to me, the holidays are not just the fun. It's also like, the reflecting and whatever. So those sacred moments where our kids are tender and we hold them and we rock them, and we feel that in sync, that synchronicity between us and them. Or they are letting us in on something. They're telling us, their mom, guess what happened at school? And we're sitting there and we're listening and we're those moments where we feel confident, like we're connected. Okay. But so remember that there's a lot less of those on the calendar than just ordinary time. Okay. But no matter how you swing it, taxes are coming every year. Okay. And taxes are not fun. No one is excited about that, but they're a part of the process. So when we get into rupture with our children, that's kind of how I see taxes, where it's like we are lacking gentleness, or we are lacking compassion, or they are just pistols for whatever reason and just not receiving any of the calm care we're giving. Like that, that's a part of the calendar. And it doesn't mean something's wrong. It's how we get to work together. Right? And so when those times come up, just remember this. A healthy, secure relationship between a parent and a child is in sync and connected 30 to 50% of the time. So that other 50, 30, 70 to 50%, we are doing the dishes, walking the dog, whatever, or we're spatting with each other. And that doesn't mean we've failed or it's okay. So when you described feeling like you have to be attuned 24/7, what I want to clarify about attunement is that attunement is our ability to accurately read the moment. So if I'm putting away the dishes and my kids are doing their homework, I'm attuned. The key is that in that moment, I'm not hypervigilant, right? Because that would make it a misattuned moment. Now, if my kid was crying in a puddle on the floor and I keep doing the dishes and ignoring them, I'm not attuned. So it's really about, can we adapt our level of attention and connection and responsiveness to our child's level of regulation or dysregulation, right? So it also would be misattuned if my child comes in and is like, I got an A on my test. They've been studying all week and they're so excited and then they finally got an A. And we're like, hold on, 1 second, I have to finish with the thing, right? Misattuned. So it's not about being constantly aware and connected. That's not attuned. That's anxious. It's about reading the room.
Yeah. I think it's, for me, my kids are older, right? They're 18 and almost 20. And the hardest part of this for me was as they got older, right? As they moved into more independence and autonomy, and I really had to very intentionally give more of their life to them to manage and navigate. The fear that we have as committed, conscious, right? Like if you're watching this video, it probably means that parenting is very high on your list of priorities. This letting go, right? That through each phase of parenting, our children require a different version of our parenting, and how anxious that made me. And Rebecca Liddon, our director of education, says this beautiful thing, which I love. She says, under stress, we regress. And I noticed myself in those times of having to trust them more, and acknowledging, like, yes, they have car keys now. They can get like really die.
They can get really die. They can get really die. Yes. Yes. We also lose meaningful speech when we're stressed. Keep going. No, that's exactly right.
And so I'd love to offer some, and it's the same, right? Like when your toddler moves into childhood, when your child moves into pre-adolescence, right? These are all opportunities for us to work on our own resourcing of safety, but it feels so real when you're in it, Eli. Talk to me about that.
Well, a couple things. One, we live in a culture that's obsessed with control. So we have to sort of work on recognizing when that mythology comes into our nervous system and says it's my job to make my child feel a certain way, do a certain thing, master a certain skill. Take a deep breath. It's our job to be a present, caring parent who offers some advice and some guidance, but who recognizes that we never had control. You didn't decide whether your child was a boy or a girl, whether they had, a specific identity, or they had a, unique falling out of the categories identity. You didn't decide, whether or not they came out butt first or head first. We don't decide what happens for our children. We decide who we are in response to what's happening for our children. So look out for this mythology of control. It's not real. And if you've been a parent for more than 2 days, you can see that. You're like, oh, okay, yes, I don't have control. I have a lot of responsibility. I have a lot of influence, but I don't have control,
Mm.
right? Um, the other thing I would say is when we are watching our children grow, we have to learn to tolerate the emotions that that it activates in our bodies just in general. So, like when kids move to a new stage, that means they move to a new stage of incompetence. So they go from competence to incompetence to competence to incompetence. That's the process. And if we've had trauma, we might do great during the stages of competence because that's when we feel order. And incompetence feels like chaos. So we just have to recognize, like, oh, they're going onto this new stage. It doesn't feel ordered. It doesn't feel that's normal. That's what they're supposed to do. I have to learn how to accept this because they can't get to that next phase without fumbling around. That's how we learn. And then I would say the other piece of that is what at each stage, what stories from our own growing up are getting to the surface that maybe we haven't really reckoned with, right? We have to reckon with our stories, and some of them we had to because they were very obvious and overt, and some of them come up more subtly as our children develop. So our 7-year-old is, annoying, right? Like there's a certain stage where it's like they're trying on different noises and voices and personas, and it's like nails on a chalkboard. Well, let's pause. Wow, it's really bugging me. It's not just a little annoying, it's like bugging me, and I'm wanting to like correct every moment. What is this? Well, how was I treated when I was in this stage? Oh, and then recognizing, oh, there's a big, big booming voice telling me how annoying I am. Oh, that made it really hard for me to really find my own path through some of these trials of self. I'm okay. Who do I want to be for my child? Well, I'm not going to be able to like everything they're doing, but I don't have to be a big booming voice of you're so annoying, right? So, pausing and recognizing what's coming up for me, what's coming up in my story, and how can I learn to trust the process?
Mhm.
This is development. Development is not this. It's this.
One of the things that I love about our work here at JAI and our students in the program and our graduates is I believe that those of us who do this kind of work of really like going down and in and knowing
Mhm,
ourselves and forgiving ourselves and
mhm,
healing carry a different we carry ourselves differently in the world.
mhm, mhm.
And I think the most important part of that is recognizing that a lot of the people around us who are um, living out different attachment patterns
Yes.
are also innocent.
Yes.
So, one of
They
the
have
struck,
different access. They have different access to information, right?
yeah,
So, yeah.
or a different desire. I don't
Hmm,
think
hmm.
everyone for whatever reason, no judgment,
Yes.
right? Not everyone has that instinct of let me look at how I
Hmm.
play a part in these relationships that I have
Yes. Yes.
and allowing that to be okay. Because the question that I have is we hear all the time from parents who are on this path how challenging it is when a co-parent or partner or spouse or
Hmm,
their parents
hmm, hmm.
um, can't
Aren't.
meet them in this, what's that
Hmm.
movie quote? Out beyond the field of right and wrong, there's a field, I'll meet you there,
Mm.
um,
Yes.
place.
Yes.
And I'm curious what tools or
Mm.
exercises you might offer listeners who have experienced that
Hmm.
to stay rooted in
Yes.
themselves and not get pulled.
I think there's a couple of pieces there. Okay, so one piece is um, a lot of folks that are coming into this work are coming into this work because they never felt supported. So I think there's this hope that of like, if I become supportive, then maybe everyone else will join me and then I will finally get the support I'm longing for from the people who weren't able to give it to me before. And I kind of want to be like a dream crusher on that. It can happen. It's extremely rare, like lottery level rare. So, as you move into this work, don't have the expectation that you're bringing everybody along with you. Probably what will happen is you will actually just endure a lot of skepticism from the people who because you're breaking tradition. You're leaving avoidance or you're leaving hypervigilance. You're leaving these coping patterns that have been inherited generationally. And so that will actually create more disconnection. So you're seeking more connection in your relationship with your child will cultivate more disconnection in relationship to potentially your partner as your parents because they won't understand it. But that doesn't mean you have to be isolated in this work. And that's where I'm like, go find your people. Like sign up for the Giants Institute. Like find a support group. Like go find groups of people who are there with you so that you can endure some of what that is and keep breaking cycles on behalf of your child so that your child can have an experience and then also have a parent who's in line with connection, attunement, and repair. Um, the other thing I think that happens is the fear that if it's just me, that's not going to make an impact. Like everyone has to be on board, or my child, or I haven't protected my child. And the great news is the data is not about that. The data says if a child has at least one secure attachment, that makes all the difference in their life because they cultivate a theory of themselves in relationship to that primary experience, and then they can process other dynamics with greater clarity, right?
Yes, I love that so much because giving our children the gift of growing into, right? Like there's no done in baseball or whatever.
Yes.
My words are not working today, but we're gonna love me anyway.
I'm into
There's
it.
no crying in baseball, but
There you
there's no
go.
done in parenting.
There
There
you
we
go.
go.
Yes, there's no end.
There's
No, it's
no
an ongoing
end
journey.
to our evolution and growth. Um, but by providing that one secure, stable relationship, then as our children go out into the world and navigate um, being treated in ways that are not grounded in the values that we've taught them to hold dear or come up
Yes.
against their boundaries, they can come process those with us,
Hmm.
and we can use those as opportunities to reinforce advocacy for themselves, to
Yes.
reinforce speaking with kindness, right? Whatever the
Yes.
things are in your family, in
Yes.
your value system that matter. And I think that that gives them such a greater sense of identity than if the whole world was meeting them with
Yes.
the attachment safety that we
Yeah.
wished they were.
Yes, right. How beautiful would that be? And I think of the serenity idea, right? So it's like focusing on putting action into what we have control over and letting go of what we don't have control over. And you do not have control over your partner having these mindsets. You do not have control over your parents having these mindsets. You have control over you having these mindsets. And so spend less time over here and more time over here. Work on your nervous system, work on your groundedness. The proof will be in the pudding. Like a child will cultivate a much closer and more meaningful relationship with a caregiver who has done this work than one who hasn't. And how sad for your child in some regards, but it's less sad than them watching you anxiously hover over the other caregivers in their life, trying to get them to be somewhere, and them still not really being able to sink into connection with you because you're preoccupied
Yeah.
with the other people in the room instead of just simply staying in your lane, right? You do you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot bigger conversation of like, do you stay in partnership with someone who is incapable? That's a whole other conversation. And,
Yeah.
we can't answer that for you. But I think people are much more likely to be converted to the ideology of connection when we aren't pushing it on them,
Yes.
when we are just modeling. And that's true for our kids too. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah.
I don't know. I find in relation, right, like some relationships are a season, some are meant to last a
Hmm.
lifetime. And what I notice is the less power we give other people's
Hmm.
defensive strategies that were also born of as innocence, the
Yes.
less they can play out in
Yes.
relationship,
Yeah.
even if they're not on board. And so I do have a lot of hope, right? That,
Hmm.
not always, right? Sometimes I'm a divorced parent. And also I notice that there are ways where I can be more compassionate
Yes.
in my friendships, in my love relationship, in my own children,
Yes.
because it's almost like that leaning back, right? Like, okay,
Hmm.
here's this human doing the thing that they do
Yes.
when they are anxious, when they are
Hmm.
stressed, when they are
Hmm.
feeling threats to their
Yes.
perception of safety. And I'm
Yes.
gonna love them through it
Yes. See their
as leadership.
humanness.
Yeah,
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 and relate. I think let's not all pretend our shit don't stink, right? Like I think I mean my husband is very much on board with a secure attachment focused parenting. However, he's not as obsessed with it as I am. He doesn't have, almost 2 decades of
He
a
doesn't have
career
his
doing
whole
this.
own Instagram channel called the
No.
Attachment Nerd Dude.
Detachment dude. No. Um, and so over the years there have been moments where I'm watching him do things that I'm like, and he watches me, has those same feelings about things I do at times. But I have found it is incredibly ineffectual to correct someone without connecting to them, right? And that it actually, when you're working with another adult, half the time really just keep your mouth shut on the correction. You just say, that was really hard. That was overwhelming that she was not listening, or that, he was having such a big reaction to X, Y, or Z. Like, how are you doing? What's coming up for you? How can I support you? Right. And if you're using that language with a partner, more often than not, their guard comes down. And when their guard comes down, something comes out. And whatever comes out usually is meaningful. Like, oh, I can't believe I'm worried about blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, yeah, that makes sense. I feel that too. How do you feel about the way you enacted or reacted? How did you feel about that? Oh, I just feel terrible. I wish I hadn't been so harsh. I think, yeah, I've done that too. I've done that too, right? Like not stepping into this idea that like there's those of us that are evolved and doing this perfectly, and then the others, right? No, it's like we're all in this trying to figure it out in different ways. And so, outside of toxic abusive dynamics, which is a different topic, there's usually just an opportunity to connect, and that becomes the legacy of helping the people in our life do more connecting with our kids, right? Because they understand the value of it more because they've experienced it from us.
Hmm. I want to leave everyone with some actionable steps because something that I've heard you say is that it's not the lack of rupture that
Mhm.
defines the quality of our parenting, but the
Mhm.
ability to repair
Yes.
and reorient ourselves to connection when the inevitable blowups
Yes.
happen, miscommunication happens,
Yes.
needs are,
Yes.
flying all over
Yes.
the place and nobody's able to meet anybody's. Can you give
Yes.
everyone watching just a process, a framework to move forward to deeper connection through rupture versus avoidance?
Yeah. Well, so think of your body as having kind of two primary opposing states. One is defensiveness, and defensiveness is designed to protect us from danger, and the other is receptiveness, and receptiveness is designed to help us connect to each other and experience the protective value of connection. Okay. So when we are in a state of anxiety, we're defensive. When we're in a state of anger, we tend to be defensive. We can be in a state of despondency, and that's also defensive. So, like, there's lots of different flavors of defensiveness. Receptiveness is really about being curious and open. Okay. And it's a relinquishment of control and a decision to prioritize togetherness over I'm in charge or I'm right. So with our kids, we're going to have those moments where we're a little too harsh, we're a little too permissive, like that's all happening. And when we can sense it's affecting our children, what we would sense is that they aren't coming to us for that soothing. They aren't coming to us for that regulation. We are not operating. And this changes obviously in adolescence. They're going to go to their friends more often, but we're still going to sense that they come and lean in a little bit with us. So if we're sensing that our kids are leaning out, leaning away, oops, or blowing up, then we want to go, how can I shift my body and my nervous system to be more receptive in their presence? So that when they say, Mom, I don't want that, that we're able to go, oh, you don't want that. Like, okay, help me understand. I'm not sure we can change this, but I want to hear you. What am I missing? Right? Or if we fly off the handle, that we come back to them and we say, I'm so sorry that I was so harsh. I just got so scared and I really lost control, and you did not deserve that, kid. And I'm gonna do X, Y, and Z to kind of work on my fear so that it doesn't come out at you like that again, right? So we're taking accountability, but we're also not going into shame. I'm such a bad mom. You didn't deserve. That's actually not repair. That puts our child in a position to feel responsible to help us feel better about ourselves. So we're really coming with compassion to ourselves, compassion to them, and I love this idea of innocence. We're all doing the best we can with what we have,
Yeah.
right? So, and we've never done all of this parenting before, right? Every next stage of parenting is brand new to us
Every
because
next minute of parenting is brand new
yes,
to us.
yes. I mean, you could have 20 kids. You could be on your, 19th kid and you've never parented that kid before. So and in that period of time and in that context. So, it's a coming back around and going, nothing matters more than our relationship and our connection. Nothing.
This to me is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow of doing the work of becoming securely attached within ourselves. I'll
Yes.
call it self-love, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Self-acceptance.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
That as we develop that capacity and that trust over time, we can receive the impact of our actions
Mm-hmm.
from other people, our children and beyond, without going into collapse, without going into guilt and shame.
Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that's what you just articulated, is that ability to say, tell me about what you felt
Yes.
when I did that, and not go into fawning, not go into fight, not go into fear.
Yes. Yes. Not imploding, not exploding, remaining steady and sturdy.
Mhm.
Yes, absolutely. And
So
that's taken me a lot of years to feel comfortable with. I just had a conversation with a friend yesterday who told me a bunch of things that she felt disappointed in our relationship. And I thought, it's still hard. Still doesn't feel good. And I can say to her, I'm so sorry you felt that way.
mhm.
That makes sense you had those emotions.
Yeah.
What do you need for me to repair this? Would it be helpful to hear where I was coming from? Would it be helpful to like have a little more context for that? Right?
Mhm.
But
I
it's a skill we all need for our whole life long in all of our relationships.
all of them. I always imagined myself like a big 100-year oak tree in those
Hmm.
moments, like roots deep in the ground and solid trunk, but my
Yes.
leaves can rustle and move and flow. And it's like, hot wind blowing, but it's not going to
Yes.
knock me off the ground, if
Totally.
that's useful.
I love it. I love it. Absolutely.
Eli, thank you so much. I know we're going to have a bunch of resources underneath this video. So a link to Eli's new book is there. We've got a handout and we will have a journaling prompt worksheet for you to download from the big takeaways from this video.
Awesome.
It's
Thank you,
always so fun
Kiva.
to play with you.
You too.